My daughter demanded that I pay for her husband's debt, so I disappeared without warning. That sentence still feels surreal to say out loud, but it's the truth. I'm telling this story not for sympathy, but because sometimes love means walking away when staying would destroy both of you. I'm Raymond Hale, born in 1965 in Dallas, Texas. Back in 2023, when I was 58, my only daughter, Clara, stood in front of me and demanded $500,000 to pay off her husband, Ethan's gambling debt. I felt disbelief, then anger, then a bone-deep sadness I can't even describe. Today, at 60, sitting on the porch of my cabin by Lake Travis, I'm finally ready to share why I vanished without a word. If you're listening, drop your thoughts below and tell me, have you ever had to choose peace over family? Clara was always the kind of child who got what she wanted. When she was 5, she wanted a pony. When she was 12, she wanted a smartphone, even though none of her classmates had one yet. I used to joke that she didn't cry when she was born. She negotiated. Her mother, Fiona, and I divorced when Clara was in college. Fiona remarried quickly, and I threw myself into work. Real estate had been good to me, and by the time I turned 50, I was semi-retired and comfortable. I had a beautiful home, a classic Mustang I tinkered with on weekends, and enough savings to live quietly for the rest of my life. Then Ethan arrived, charming, confident, and broke. He sold dreams better than a car salesman at Christmas. He was tall, good-looking, the kind of man who could talk a snake into shedding its skin. Clara fell for him in a heartbeat. They married within a year, despite my quiet protests. I saw the way he flinched when money was mentioned, the way his eyes darted when I asked about work. But Clara was convinced she'd found her forever. "Dad," she said once, gripping my hand, "Ethan is just waiting for his big break." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her judgment. After all, I had raised her to think for herself. For a few years, I watched them play house with my money. It started with small requests: a loan for their first home, then help with temporary business expenses, then a car Ethan claimed was an investment. I didn't even blink when I co-signed their mortgage because, in my heart, I still saw my little girl in pigtails. But over time, the requests grew bolder and the gratitude shrank. I became their safety net, the invisible hand that kept their fantasy afloat. One afternoon, Clara called, her voice trembling with urgency. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. "It's important." I could tell something was wrong. When she arrived, she was dressed impeccably, her perfume lingering long after she entered the room. But her eyes, those same bright eyes from her childhood, were dulled by fear. Ethan followed behind her, quieter than usual, a man rehearsing his line. "Dad," Clara began, "Ethan made a mistake. He got involved in some business deals that went south." Ethan cleared his throat. "It's more complicated than that, sir. I owe some people a significant amount of money." "How much?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Clara looked at Ethan, then back at me. $500,000. For a moment, I thought she'd said 50. My breath caught. $500,000? "Yes," she said quickly, "but it's not as bad as it sounds. We just need you to cover it temporarily. Once Ethan's new project takes off, we'll pay you back. We swear." I laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. "Clara, do you even hear yourself? $500,000 isn't pocket change. You're asking me to fix something that shouldn't even exist." Her tone sharpened. "Dad, we're your family. You've helped everyone else. Why not us? You have the money." Ethan shifted uncomfortably but didn't intervene. He knew she was better at this game. "I've helped you plenty," I said calmly. "You live in a house I paid for. You drive a car When does it stop, Clara?" Her lips trembled, but her eyes hardened. "It stops when you stop acting like you can control me with your money." That cut deep. I stood there, stunned. wondering how the little girl who once cried because I missed her school play had become this entitled stranger. Clara, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to protect you from a man who's gambling with your life. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's enough, sir. I admit I made some bad choices, but I'll make things right. We just need time and some help. You've had plenty of help, I replied. From me, from your wife. You've run out of excuses. The tension crackled like a storm waiting to break. Clara crossed her arm. If you don't help us, they'll come after us. You'd let that happen to your daughter? I stared at her. You'd let this happen to yourself? That silence between us was colder than any winter I'd ever known. I realized then that my kindness had turned into a cage for both of us. Every dollar I gave her bought me guilt instead of gratitude. Every bailout made her weaker, and every time I said yes, I lost a little more respect in her eyes. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and thought about the man I'd become, a father who couldn't say no, a man whose generosity had turned his daughter into a beggar. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I decided to disappear. I didn't come to that conclusion out of anger, but out of necessity. I had tried reasoning, pleading, even bribing her into responsibility, but nothing worked. I realized that the only way to save her was to let her hit the ground and understand that money can't buy peace, love, or self-respect. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Greg Morton. Greg, I said, I need to make some changes to my estate plan. Quietly, he paused. Are you sure, Ray? You know what this will mean. I'm sure, I said. It's time. Over the next few days, I began gathering documents, reviewing every asset tied to Clara and Ethan's name. I saw the mess I had created. Joint accounts, co-signed loans, credit cards, even a vacation property under their name that I had paid for in full. It was like realizing, you've been feeding a fire, thinking you were keeping it warm. I didn't sleep that week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's face, angry, desperate, blaming. I wondered if she'd ever forgive me. But deep down, I also wondered if she'd ever forgive herself. When I met Greg in his office, he looked at me with concern. This is going to be messy, he said. You're about to dismantle their entire financial safety net. I know, I said, but they've mistaken that net for wings. That night, I called Fiona, my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in months, but she deserved to know. Fiona, I said, I'm leaving for a while. Leaving? She repeated. Where? I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I can't keep watching Clara destroy herself. I'm pulling everything back. The house, the accounts, all of it. She sighed. Raymond, she'll hate you for this. I know, I said quietly, but maybe one day she'll thank me. I hung up and sat alone in my study. The walls were lined with family photos of Clara's graduation, our old dog, our family Christmases. I stared at one picture of her on her wedding day, smiling as if nothing could ever go wrong. I whispered to that photo, I hope you'll understand someday. That night, I drafted a letter. It wasn't long, just a few pages explaining why I was doing what I had to do. I wrote, I love you too much to keep being your escape plan. The world will teach you what I could. I hope, someday, you'll forgive me for letting it. I folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope marked to Clara, when you're ready. That was the night I decided who I needed to become. Not the provider, not the savior, but the father who finally said enough. And for the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't vanish overnight. It took weeks of quiet preparation, long nights, and a heart heavy with doubt. Every move I made was deliberate. Every decision, a small betrayal wrapped in love. It started with my finances. I sat with Greg, my lawyer, one afternoon in his oak-paneled office as the Texas sun spilled through the blinds. Let's begin, I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. He clicked his pen and began reviewing documents spread across the desk. We'll transfer the deed of the house back into your name, he said. We'll freeze the joint accounts and close their credit cards. But once we do, there's no turning back. I nodded. That's the point. It felt strange, cutting financial cords I'd spent years weaving. I had built Clara's comfort with my own hands, brick by brick, check by check. Now I was undoing it all, like tearing down a home to save the foundation. My heart ached, but my mind was clear. I knew what had to be done. The next call I made was to the bank. Yes, I said to the manager. I'd like to suspend all activity on the Hale family accounts, effective immediately. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, does your daughter know about this? No, I replied softly. And she doesn't need to. Not. Later I hired a private investigator to confirm what I already suspected. Ethan's debts weren't just business-related. They were tied to underground gambling. The man owed money to people you don't ignore. There were texts, IOUs, even photos of him sneaking into poker clubs on weeknights, while Clara thought he was working late. When the investigator slid the folder across the table, I felt my stomach twist. How bad is it? I asked. Bad enough, the man said. He's been lying for months, maybe years. I nodded, gripping the folder tightly. It was everything I needed to see, and everything I wished I hadn't. But I kept my composure. Thank you, I said, sliding an envelope of cash across to him. You've done well. This stays between us. That evening, I sat in my study again, sorting through the evidence, bank statements, photos, and notes. I placed them neatly into a wooden box, the same one I used to store Clara's old report cards when she was little. It felt symbolic of her past innocence and her present deception, both in the same container. I added the letter I'd written to her and sealed the box. On top I wrote, "Open when the world feels too heavy." 2 days later, I booked a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. I didn't tell anyone, not Fiona, not Greg, not even my neighbor, who always waved when I checked the mail. I just knew I needed space, distance, silence, the kind of silence that allows truth to settle without interference. The night before my flight, I sat outside under the stars. The air was warm, filled with the quiet hum of crickets. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the unknown. Was I doing the right thing? Would Clara see this as abandonment, or as love disguised as cruelty? I whispered into the night, please, let her understand one day. The next morning, I left everything behind my house, my phone, my routines. I carried only a single suitcase, my passport, and a small amount of cash. Before locking the door for the last time, I placed the wooden box on the dining table. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust in the air. I hesitated, tracing my hand along the edge of the table where Clara once did her homework. Then I turned the key, walked away, and didn't look back. I landed in Costa Rica by evening. The humidity hit me like a wave, thick and heavy, but oddly comforting. The small coastal town of Puerto Viejo became my sanctuary. I rented a modest cabin overlooking the water. Nothing fancy, just peace and quiet. The locals were kind, offering warm smiles and fresh mango. I told them I was writing a book about family, and in a way, I suppose I was. At night, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the waves, trying to convince myself I wasn't a terrible father. I thought about Clara constantly, where she might be, what she might say when she found the box. Part of me imagined her storming into my empty house, screaming my name. Another part of me pictured her sitting silently, realizing for the first time that the safety net was gone. About a week into my stay, Greg called. I hadn't planned on answering, but something made me pick up. She knows, he said. Clara came by my office today. She's furious, Ray. Said you blindsided her. I expected that, I replied, my voice low. How's Ethan taking it? He's not taking anything. The creditors came for him. He's vanished. I exhaled slowly. I see. She also found the box, Greg continued. She read your letter. And? I asked, my heart thudding. She cried, he said softly, but not the angry kind. More like, she finally got it. For a long time, I didn't say anything, just stared out at the sea. Thank you, Greg, I said finally. Don't tell her where I am. I figured you'd say that, he said with a sigh. Take care of yourself, Ray. After that call, I didn't hear from anyone for months. I filled my days with small rituals. Morning walks along the shore, helping the local fishermen fix nets, and reading old paperbacks. Slowly, the noise inside me quieted. I began to sleep better. I stopped checking the calendar, but the guilt never completely left. Some nights, I dream of Clara as a little girl again, running across the lawn, shouting, "Daddy, look at me," and I'd wake up with tears in my eyes, wondering if I had destroyed the very bond I was trying to save. About 2 months later, I received a letter at my cabin. It was from Fiona. She had somehow tracked me down. The envelope was worn from travel, the handwriting familiar but hesitant. I opened it carefully. Ray, it began, I thought you'd want to know. Clara's been working. She got a job at Nordstrom. She's been humble, quiet, and different. She doesn't talk much about you, but I can tell she's thinking about you. Maybe you were right. Maybe this is what she needed. I read that letter 3 times. My heart swelled with both relief and ache. Clara is working, earning, trying. It felt like the first sunrise after a long storm. The next day, I walked to the water and stood ankle deep in the waves. The tide tugged gently at my feet, and I closed my eyes. You're doing it, kid, I whispered. You're finding your way. Among the junk and statements was a short note forwarded to my P.O. box from an unknown sender. No return address, just neat handwriting. Dad, I found the box. I hated you for a while, but now I think I understand. You didn't abandon me. You saved me from myself. I'm learning, I promise. I'm sorry it took me so long. I held that letter for a long time. The ink smudged slightly from my thumb. That night, for the first time since leaving, I allowed myself to smile. It wasn't joy exactly. It was peace. Still, I didn't go back immediately. She needed time to grow on her own, to find her strength without me rushing in. I had learned the danger of rescuing too soon. So I stayed in Costa Rica another 2 months, letting the days roll by. The locals began calling me Señor Silencio, Mr. Silence, because I rarely spoke of my past, but they noticed the way my eyes softened whenever a father and daughter walked by together. I kept that letter from Clara folded in my wallet. A small reminder that sometimes the hardest decisions make room for the most beautiful growth. And even though I was far away, I knew one thing for certain. My daughter was finally learning to stand on her own 2 feet. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready for me to come home. 5 months after I disappeared, I returned to Austin. I didn't announce my arrival. There were no grand gestures, no phone calls, no dramatic reappearances. I just booked a quiet flight home, packed the same small suitcase I had taken to Costa Rica, and stepped back into the life I'd left behind. The taxi ride from the airport felt like stepping through layers of old memory. Every street carried echoes. Clara's laughter as a child, Sunday barbecues, birthdays, arguments, reconciliations. But this time, everything looked smaller, not because the city had changed, but because I had. When I pulled up to my old house, I hesitated before getting out. The paint had faded slightly, and the lawn was overgrown. A for sale sign leaned awkwardly in the yard. I stood there for a while, watching the wind move through the trees, then took a deep breath and walked up to the porch. I had handed the keys to a property manager before leaving, so I knew I could still enter. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of wood polish and distant nostalgia hit me. Everything was familiar, but empty. The furniture, the pictures, the silence. I didn't stay long. That house wasn't my destination. I had one stop in mind. a small coffee shop downtown called Bean and Bloom, where I had once taken Clara for hot chocolate when she was 10. I'd heard through Greg that she worked nearby now, at a community center teaching. He didn't tell me the details, but he'd said one simple thing that stuck with me. She's found purpose, Ray. I ordered a coffee and sat near the window, watching people pass by. Then, as if the universe had planned it, she appeared. Clara. She was walking briskly, her hair tied up, her clothes simple but neat. No designer purse, no luxury jewelry. She looked real, lighter, even. The entitled gleam in her eyes had softened into something wise. She carried a tote bag with pamphlets, peeking out Budgeting 101, Building Credit Responsibly, Life After Debt. I smiled faintly. My little girl was teaching others what she had once refused to learn. I almost didn't call her name. I wanted to watch her a bit longer, to see this new version of her in motion. But my heart wouldn't let me stay silent. Clara. She froze, turning slowly. Her eyes widened as they landed on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she walked over, cautious, as though I might vanish again. Dad? Her voice trembled. It's me, I said softly. There was no anger in her face, just emotion, shock, sadness, relief, all tangled together. She sank into the seat across from me. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. I thought you were gone for good, she said finally. I thought I might be, I admitted, but I had to see if you were okay. She nodded slowly. You really left, just like that? I did, I said, holding her gaze. Because if I stayed, I would have kept saving you from lessons you needed to learn yourself. Tears filled her eyes. It hurts, you know. I thought you hated me. I could never hate you, I said, my voice low. But love isn't always soft, Claire. Sometimes it's sharp. Like medicine, it stings before it heals. She smiled faintly, wiping her cheek. You sound like one of those motivational speakers. I chuckled. I picked it up from a fisherman in Costa Rica. Wise man, missing 2 teeth. She laughed. And for a moment, we were just father and daughter again. No debts, no demands, just us. After a long pause, she said, I found the letter. I know, it broke me, she whispered. But then, it built me. I reached across the table and took her hand. That's all I ever wanted. She told me everything. How Ethan disappeared the night the accounts froze. How the house was foreclosed. How she cried for weeks, working shifts at Denny's just to pay for groceries. How humiliation became her teacher, and humility became her friend. She told me about the day she found the storage unit. I'd left behind a box of her old toys, family photos, and a savings bond I'd set aside when she was 12. She had used part of that money to take financial counseling classes. Then, she started teaching others who had made the same mistakes she once did. It's strange, she said. I used to think money was love. Now I know love is what stays when the money's gone. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said gently, but forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about freeing both of us. She squeezed my hand. Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when it looked like you did. I never gave up. I just gave you space to find yourself. We spent the rest of that afternoon talking, laughing, filling in the blanks of the months we'd lost. She told me she'd moved into a small apartment and was saving to buy her own place. Nothing fancy, she said with pride, but it's mine. That single word, mine, carried more meaning than any mansion ever could. When we finally left the cafe, she hugged me tightly. It wasn't the quick, distracted kind she used to give. This one was long and sincere. The kind of embrace that says, I get it now. I missed you, Dad, she whispered. I missed you too, sweetheart. That evening, she invited me to visit her new workplace, the community center,
where she volunteered part-time. It was a modest building, painted light blue, with handwritten posters on the wall about budgeting and debt recovery. As we walked through, people greeted her warmly. I saw how they respected her. One young woman stopped and said, "Miss Clara, thank you again for helping me with my credit score. I got approved for my first apartment." Clara smiled, then turned to me. "Dad, this is my father." The girl's face lit up. "Oh, she talks about you all the time." I blinked, caught off guard. "Does she now?" Clara laughed. "Only the good parts." Watching her in that space, confident, kind, grounded, filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in years. I realized then that my disappearance hadn't broken her. It had revealed her strength, and perhaps in some poetic way, it had also saved me. A few weeks later, I helped her register her new business, Hale and Hart Financial Coaching. We laughed at the name choice. "It sounds fancy," she said, "like I know what I'm doing." "You do," I told her. "You're teaching others what took you a lifetime to learn. That's real wisdom." We spent that summer rebuilding, not the kind of rebuilding that involves money or houses, but one that happens in quiet conversations, shared meals, and long walks. She came by my cabin sometimes, bringing homemade soup and silly stories. One evening, she said, "Do you ever regret leaving?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said softly, "because leaving helped you find your way back. Not to me, but to yourself." She smiled. "You always did know how to make a lecture sound poetic." "Genetic talent," I said with a wink. Months passed, and life settled into something peaceful. Clara thrived in her new role, helping families navigate financial struggle. I'd visit her workshops occasionally, sitting quietly in the back, as she spoke about budgeting and discipline, sprinkling humor into her lessons. One day, she caught my eye from the podium, smiled, and said to the group, "Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who let us fall." I smiled back, proud beyond words. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from my porch, Clara leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "you disappearing was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but also the best." I placed my hand over her. "Sometimes the hardest choices make room for grace." We stayed like that, quiet and content, as the sun dipped below the lake. There were no more debts to pay, no words left unsaid, just peace, the kind that comes when forgiveness finally finds its home. And as fireflies began to flicker around us, I realized something simple yet profound. I hadn't disappeared to abandon my daughter. I had disappeared to give her back her life. Moral lesson: love isn't proven by how much we give, but by when we choose to stop giving. True compassion means allowing others to face their own storms, knowing growth only comes through struggle. Clara learned responsibility the hard way, and I learned that tough love isn't cruelty, it's courage wrapped in silence. We both discovered that family isn't about dependency, but about trust, humility, and second chances. If you're listening, remember, letting go doesn't mean walking away forever. Sometimes, it means standing back, just far enough for love to finally take root and grow strong.